Testing 1, 2. Perfect. It works. All right, so we're just getting the stream started here, but we've still got a few minutes, maybe about 5, 10-ish, yeah, about 10 minutes before the actual meeting starts, so hang tight.
Testing, testing, testing. All right. We control the horizontal, we control the vertical.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to let everybody know we're going to be starting in about 7 minutes or so, later than expected, but don't worry, it's all because, well, yeah, because I expected earlier, but whatever, you know. I, I, I am. We are even zoomed into you, Kevin. Nice. So anyway, just wanted to give you the heads up. We'll be right back. the text underneath the video, they actually show it.
I received that. It is constantly trying to refocus, yes.
Oh, it's refocusing. Have you ever had scroll break?
So why is the lightsaber always in the bottom of the bag? So it's working at this place in Santa Cruz that does soundy type stuff. And they had a mic that looked remarkably like this one, you know, reasonably professional looking mic. But instead of having an XLR on the bottom, USB. And it just goes to show you. Uh-huh. I like the guitar cable. It's like a 1/4-inch guitar plug on one end. The other end is USB. Yeah. And it's like, okay, where's the little dongle thing? It's in the connector, but the connector is overmolded to look about the size of something like this.
That's all that chip, the USB dongle, the serial is.
Yeah, it's a lot like these USB to RS-232 doohickeys. You know,
They're becoming dust.
yeah, the pins are actually the big part. Yeah. It's always like Chuck says, the problem is getting the pins.
Remember when digital storage is so finally it's so small that you can fit it inside the box phone? You can actually fit a DSO down to the size of an electronics adapter.
I don't remember those personally.
When is someone going to come up with the USB 3.0 version of the oscilloscope?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
3.0 is not catching on very fast.
Well,
It is for storage.
Thumb drives.
Storage, yes.
For storage.
You're finally seeing the thumb drives that are 3.0.
Yeah.
you know, it'd be nice to have like a quad input that
That
can be like, you know,
What's that?
gigabit per second.
I'm sorry, say it again.
You're the June meeting.
Third line.
Oh, where it says June here? And then underneath it says July 26th. Well, this is actually a continuation of the June meeting. A lot of you didn't realize that, but I figured I had so little content, it doesn't make for a whole meeting of itself. All right, keeping that in mind, since it's 1:10, I guess welcome to all of you that are actually here. Be quiet. To those of you that are talking, John, you'll get your chance later. This will be about a half an hour, and then you're on. Maybe a little less at the rate this is going. Well, and welcome to all of you out on the interwebs. And so without further ado, I'd like to go around and do quickie introductions. I will stand near you so that maybe people out in the Webby will be able to hear who the heck you are. Hi, Sam. Who are you? And what content would you like to recommend for next month or some future meeting? Either yourself, these are your options, by the way, for the rest of you. You could say, I'd like to present a talk about X, and tell us what X is. Or option B is, I'd like to hear somebody talk about blah, blah, blah. Or if you can put a name on it, I'd like to hear John talk about data recovery. Or option 3, Roman numeral 3 that is IOU. And what IOU means is that sometime in the next week you'll send me an email or to the list saying, here's some piece of content that I recommend or that I'd like to see or that I will present. So, Sam.
So, my name is Sam Felvo. I'm a fourth coder.
Hi, Sam.
So what I would like to see next meeting is more fourth projects from other people besides myself and Dr. That's what I would like to see. And the reason I say that is because I'm back from a 6-month hiatus, soon to go on another 2-month hiatus, and therefore not much is getting done on the Kestrel. So I don't have very much content, but I know the rest of you out there do. So I'd like to see it.
And for those of you who are out in the web, I'd like to say that we are happy to have folks present via Google Hangout, and that has worked out both well and badly. Well in some cases, badly in others, but such is life. We're hoping to evolve. Dennis, who are you?
I can't focus while I'm...
I know the feeling. Don't focus. Just say your name.
I'm Dennis Rupert.
Suggest some content.
Have been hoping for content, but I got bored and defeated by the...
There you go.
There we go. By a bunch of other stuff. If we get time, I can tell you where we're at. There's more coming.
And the where we're at is with regard to the interweb presentation of our meetings and the infrastructure theretofore. Hey, George. George is chairman for life for his SIDS.
And I'm really, really happy with the embrace of the open sorcery and the general vibes. So rather than complain, or I will keep my ambitions, I'd say individually. Thanks.
All right.
Hi, I'm Dave.
Hi,
I'm host
Dave.
here at Stanford. I don't have any things to present.
So that's an IOU.
It's an IOU.
All right.
Hi, I'm John
Hi, John.
Harvold. I would like to return working on my ability to port G4 onto ECOS and be able to get it up and run. And what the hell are you laughing at? Falvo.
All right. That's enough of you.
I'm Brad Nelson. I intend to present, hopefully, G4 running in my my new command line dev environment in the browser.
Okay, I'm Ting, and I don't know. I think I'll just stay away.
There you go. All right, John, and we're going to, I guess today I'm going to talk about some data recovery and general terms, and also some recovery that people can do, on their own, assuming, they're up to it. But as far as future, that's still in question. It's IOU there.
And I'm John Carpenter, and I live in Mountain View. I have a whole bunch of false documentation and figuring out what to do.
Well, it's interesting that you should mention that because Jason sent an email to the list asking folks about old fourth books and things. In general, you can bring that stuff to pretty much any meeting. If you could give us some advanced warning, certain colleagues of ours have just showed up with a truckload and said, oh, take it or leave it. So advanced warning is good, but just bring it in. Don't send it to the recycling or the landfill or any of that. It reminds me, the other John's comment about saving data. It always amuses me when you see some some TV program, police procedural, where they have some perpetrator's laptop and they take it back to the cop shop or even in the perpetrator's apartment. You know, the first thing they do is fire it up. And you say to yourself, well, that's stupid. The first thing I would do is take the battery out, take the power out, unless this is some sort of super sophisticated hacker guy, and take the hard drive out. And then make a copy of the hard drive and manipulate the copy. But
I certainly wouldn't put a network cable into my super secret spy.
yeah, there you go.
Or even they throw in a thumb drive. And then watch the bar move across, and within a few minutes, the hard drive's copied.
Yeah. All I can say is their cell phone modem works a lot better than mine.
Yeah.
Well, that's because it's
It's still not big enough.
No, all of those are actually, they're Wi-Fi hotspots, you know. So just for fun, let's have a look at what's supposed to happen. It rarely ever does. So, I had a couple of things about people. How many of you know who Nick Moffat is? He's our host on Zork. He's the czar of Zork. And this is his article on the history of Unix. And it's an interesting read, and I recommend it to you. It might appear in the links this month or not. This is the Linux or Linux journal, depending on whether you're erudite or erudite. And it lists a number of Nick Moffat's articles of interest, or not. So, speaking of people, you guys have heard of this guy, no doubt. Weird Al Yankovic has his first studio album in a number of years. And I guess the CD is a vanishing art. Is that true? Is it going to come and go faster than the vinyl did? But this is available on CD and maybe available on vinyl for all I know. August 5th, it says, at a reasonable price. You have to wonder, are they recycling old Beatles records to make this, or what's the deal?
According to some sources, this is also his very first #1 album as well.
There's no accounting for taste, or the people that didn't buy previous albums lack thereof.
He suddenly got money. Much more than he was.
I refuse to credit that statement. A friend of mine came up to me and said he needed 2 or 3 cables to get from his Microsoft Surface to his HDMI TV.
Yes.
And I find that hard to believe.
You need at least 2.
Well, does one of them go to a little box that converts?
Yes.
Okay. So, when you put a CD or a thumb drive into your computer, do you get that screen that says, what would you like to do with this?
Yes.
That's bad.
Even in Windows 8.
Pretty much anything you plug into your computer shouldn't do anything until you tell it to do it, in my opinion. Even if it's some sort of...
Not do that anymore.
So anyway, if you're from the Dark Ages, there you go. Here's this article on, I guess this is Microsoft's article. The one on How to Geek tells you how to go to the group policy editor. And
This is probably
make that change.
This is the one for XP.
Notice how the guy in the picture next to the warning that support for Windows XP is terminated. It's like so happy and smiling.
Yes, he is. This is supposed to be a good day.
It's sad when even Microsoft is.
So anyway, How to Geek is one of these sites that has all sorts of interesting stuff on it, and I recommend them to you.
And I'll bet they don't talk about Windows 8.
How to Geek? Yeah, I think they do. Windows 7 and Windows 8 these days.
Sometimes.
That was an old article that I brought up.
Depends on the article. Gotta be a newer article.
Yeah, sure, there you go. So, just trying to get myself sorted out before the lunch break, and I wasn't very successful at doing it. And then getting my laptop to show up on the screen was problematic. So, I saw on the interwebs a atomic watch. And the great thing about this one was it's not just a radio link to NIST. This one actually has a cesium beam standard built into the darn thing. Well, or something of the sort. Anyway, this is from about a year ago. They actually have, I think on eBay and a couple of other places that I've seen, they have little beam standards. I think they put out 10 megahertz or something. Yeah, cesium gas oven, right there. So if you believe things that you read on the internet, they built about 12 of these for people with more money than sense.
So we're going to see an outbreak of breast cancer.
These are bought by people who are always late.
Yes, that too.
So they know precisely how late they are.
And consider it acceptable.
So that was a contribution to new and interesting stuff, if you count new as anything within the last 2 or 3 years, and interesting perhaps in an academic sense. So this is purportedly a geek website called Locker Gnome. How many of you geeks need a travel steamer? I mean, they must be making geeks, they must be making a different kind of computer geek than when I was younger.
Yeah, they're called programmers now.
They've got their blue Oxford shirt neatly pressed now, and their khaki colored Dockers. By the way, khaki is actually yellower than that color that the Dockers are, but we digress. Khaki is a color. So, app-controlled smart bartender. It's got a little scale, and you add things until it tells you to stop, apparently. Here's a little plastic lower stage of a Titan, it looks like, rocket fuel coffee dripper. Unbreakable. I would say cut resistant, but that would be me. See, these guys have a little more sense. The glove people have a little more sense. They call their gloves cut resistance. Is anybody, speaking of margarita mixers, like such as this one, Has anybody else seen this little margarita mixer that looks like it's got motorcycle throttle and brakes and a little gasoline engine? So you take this thing down, you fill it up with your mixture of gas and oil and margarita mix and tequila, hopefully getting everything in the right chambers. And then you pull the cord like a lawnmower engine, and it will mix your margarita. And you serious horsepower. This company that I was talking about a little earlier with all the audio gear had a panini press, but they didn't have a ciabatta bread source. Apparently it was all sliced sourdough and whole wheat and rye. And I told them that a panini without ciabatta isn't like a day without sunshine. And unfortunately, I think they were thinking I was talking about some Wookiee. But we digress. This is interesting. This is a device that will charge your iPhone and start your car, apparently.
Don't touch that cable. Lick it. Lick it.
So,
Yeah.
your car? It's funny, you know, I can't use this little cigarette lighter device that keeps your car computer alive anymore. You know, a little 9-volt battery plugs into your cigarette lighter, because when I turn my key off, it disconnects the cigarette lighter from the battery.
Yes.
Sorry, it's not a cigarette lighter anymore, it's a power point.
Yes, it's an accessory device.
There you go. But they all turn off when you turn the car off now.
Unless you discharge your battery.
Well-
Ironically, my car has a USB port that does stay on after the car is off.
That's pretty cool. You know, it's interesting. I think that AAA got so tired of jump-starting cars that they have replaced that service with one that comes out and sells you a battery on the spot. Great fun.
It's actually more efficient to do that.
And it makes them more money to do that. It's more efficient from a cost-effectiveness standpoint from their side.
What else matters?
My Prius has a car management system,
So we can all speculate on who's going to need a Star Trek onesie for their baby anytime in the near future. So don't buy them a red one. They won't last the episode.
Unless they happen to be engineers.
Yes, with your security detail.
How many of you are familiar with iFixit? I think we were talking last month about all the different fasteners, you know, Torx and Trilobe and so on. If you need a screwdriver for one of these, iFixit will sell it to you. They'll sell you the little crowbar to open up your iPhone if that's what you need.
Until the next device comes out with a different screw.
And then they'll sell you that one.
Correct.
iFixit is a wholly owned subsidiary of Killian Marketing.
All right. So let me take a brief pause to ask if anybody else has anything new or interesting or something that they want to talk about for less than 2 minutes. If they want to talk about it for more than 2 minutes, it'll be later.
I can do a quickie.
2 minutes?
I can as well.
Okay.
Which one wants to do it more?
Why don't you take it in series, and you can do it first, Sam?
Hang on. Okay, that's supposed to keep my shirt.
It is supposed to fall off. All right, so I just wanted to tell everybody that October 26th is the day of my wedding. I'm getting married to Steph Mansour, who's my fiance, and we wanted to extend an invitation to SVFIG members. If anybody wants to attend the wedding, all I need from you is a mailing address that we can send the formal invite to, and then you can send it back, yay or nay or whatever. The wedding is going to be in San Ramon. It's at the Wedgwood location. It's a golf course. I forget the name of the full golf course, but it's like a Wedgwood wedding center or meeting center or something like that. But it's up in San Ramon. The address of that should be available. If not on the invitation, then you email us. We'll be happy to answer that. We also have like a hotel block. If anybody's traveling from afar, the hotel has like a free bus that goes to the event and back. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Everybody here is invited. Everybody who's watching online. If there's like hundreds of thousands of people, that would probably be a logistics problem, but you know. I'm sure that a number of people that I know from the SVFIG group who normally attends during 4th day, that sort of thing, everybody there is invited as well. Just send me your mailing address so that I can put together the invite and send it your way. Thank you. Yes. Congrats. You're going to let me have the pipe? Are we still on here? Are we still on here?
Yeah, I can hear you.
We are here. Okay. If this works. There we are. Wonderful. You? Who can tell me what that is? Where did I go with it? There it is. That is this. This is a zoom lens off of eBay. I've got to figure that out eventually, but you also see that there's no image. That's because the focal point is about 3.5 inches behind the things on all the connectors. I now have to get what is called a teleconverter, and that's coming next. That costs more money. So, still working on that. We just found out today that the camera takes more than 500 milliamps, which is going to be a problem. We'll have to figure that out. Then the other thing was the little Arduino Bluetooth thing that I had last month. Talked about last month. Turns out that the Bluetooth stack that they used is not licensed for the chip they used. The software stack comes from Blue Giga. Blue Giga makes their own hardware modules. They put on a TI module. Bit of a problem. So that's why earlier I said I got bored. I've got to get over getting bored before I move on to the next stage of what am I going to do about Bluetooth on that device. What else? And Kevin just walked out. I thought we were only supposed to have 2 minutes. Yes?
Could you say those backup storage batteries that power your camera instead of powering it from your computer?
That's what I have. Effectively, this is a 7,000 milliamp battery. It's a monster battery that I use. I tried to go back to the original battery because then my focal length is shorter. I get closer to the lens.
Actually, I need to get further away. So now that I understand that shall I chase the camera? Now that I understand that the camera and streaming takes more than 500 milliamps, which is what I'm plugged into my computer, I can bring a actual Samsung battery charger, which pumps more than 500 milliamps, as most vendors of systems do. That's why they sell their own battery chargers, is none of them put up 500 milliamps. None of them can really run fully on 500 milliamps. And I figured that might be a case. We just proved it today. We also saw that the way I'm streaming, that from the camera in my cell phone, that's going over Wi-Fi out to the cloud, and from the cloud back to my computer, and from my computer back out to Google+. And that is a lower resolution than Sam's camera on his laptop, which is taking perfectly wonderful pictures of the screen, much better resolution of the screen than I can take at the moment. So we also have to figure. I also have to figure that one out. So the saga keeps on going. And now Kevin's back.
Kevin's going to stop blathering for a while. And,
Good.
If there's an opportunity, I'll blather some more later.
It's on.
Introduce yourself.
So I figure out how to clippy this.
Okay, we'll make sure we are in the top position. Check.
Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Too loud? Yeah?
They told me that 20 years ago. You're peaking.
You're peaking.
Already peaked. We're in the deep.
All right. So we're gonna start on talk on data loss prevention and some recovery. The recovery stuff, we're just going to go over what you would call just level 1 stuff, which is more logical based problems at the end. And a lot of this stuff are things that most people already know about, but obviously we'll also provide, we could probably provide the PowerPoint to people if they want it. So first thing is we're going to talk about kind of like an overview of storage devices, prevention on storage devices, creating backup plan, testing it, some software that's available, and of course level 1 recoveries on hard drives. So storage devices. These are pretty common everyday things that everybody goes into, just local disks, externals, NASs, direct attach storage, cloud-based, and of course tape devices. Tape is not dead, by the way. A lot of people think. There's a couple of devices, especially coming out with Quantum, which is, there's a device called linear tape file systems. Go back there. Which are actually quite fast. They will read and write at hard drive speeds. They work with LTO5 and LTO6 type tapes, and but of course there's a lot of upfront cost in those types of technologies, but it depends upon the purpose. So we're going to talk about a little bit about prevention, dealing with just with the hardware for desktops, flash devices, NASs, and tape devices. So desktops, some common things. A lot of people have internal storage, but a lot of people think that they attach a USB device or direct attach storage or NAS or something. They always keep thinking I'm going to lose, not have a lot of space on my local disk. I'm just going to move it to my external, right? And I see this all the time. It just confounds the heck out of me that people do that instead of actually just cloning their boot drive, getting a larger disk, and matching both the internal and external device to the size that you will grow over a given period of time. And of course, having, let's say, a secondary hard internal or external drive to duplicate to is always a good thing, especially if you're a paranoid person or doing heavy graphics, programmers, and stuff like that. You can always have internal cloning going between and syncing between your main disk and the secondary internal disk, and then, of course, having a tertiary external drive that you copy over periodically. And the general rule is if you only have one location, you have no backup. And people think that they have an external drive on their system, and they think that's a backup. But they're not leaving their data on the internal device, the internal hard drive, which is kind of weird.
It's a backup of something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's just a perception, and that's what it is. So I created this thing, a little story time of epic failure, right? These are stories that I hear from customers, clients all the time. And basically, this one is about external drive that somebody plugged in, and they were copying files from. It's their only drive that they have this data on. They said, oh, I'm going to copy these files off, and all of a sudden they start getting errors on the disk. And you think, well, do you have the same stuff on the main drive that you originally copied it from to? And the answer is no. This type of situation we're going to talk about in the recovery portion of it, where you can actually use to get your data out off of this type of problem. Flash-based devices are really good. They come in all different sizes, and also USB 2 versus 3. There are some problems with the 3, just for a lot of people who are using them in version 2 ports, right? Okay. This is one of the things you kind of mentioned, right? USB 3 is great. If you use, let's say, a 64 gig 3.0, but if you use a 128, it may not work 100%. Exactly. It draws more power for the larger RAM, and you will be screwed. I know this because I did that Tuesday. I copied over some PST files to my 128 gig USB 3, took it to the customer site, and I had USB device failure on every system. It was the most annoying thing you can imagine. Have to go back, copy it off to something else, and then return back to the site and not look like somebody who was an idiot. So just a heads up there. So the methodology is basically if you use a USB as transport device, methodology on the screen that you see here is the simplest, even though it is kind of extraneous to some people. Why can't I just work off the USB? Because eventually it will fail. It will have your main copy of something on there that you just made changes to that you need and couldn't replicate. And then you'll be sorry. So by following this given procedure here, you ensure that there's actually 3 copies of your data at any point in the transportation of it. And also, you can have 2 USB devices. They're cheap. Make 2 copies, and then carry them with you just in case one fails. And we'll talk a little bit about some recovery on flash media in general not SSDs, because that's a whole different ball of wax. So basically, a general rule is when you need it, it will fail, and it just isn't good. So the story, basically, we had copying. We had somebody have a USB 3. They had their QuickBooks data on it. And guess what? It was their master copy. They didn't copy it to the local disk for whatever reason. I have no idea why. They didn't even write a QBB back to their main system. When it asked them, they just ignored it all the time. And to get this back is difficult because you have to do chip transplants, and that in itself is just pain because of manufacturer models and types and brands all differ. So you have to just make sure you always copy it to the local disk, back yourself up. NASs, SAN devices, best thing to do is obviously RAID 5. RAID 6 is always better. RAID 5 is one drive fail out. 6 is 2. So if you have the money and the size of your RAID and it can do 6, it's worth it over time. There are NASs now, which are like QNAPs and other kind of brands that will actually do syncing between the NASs, which is pretty amazing. It's all internal to the internal to the NAS itself. You just tell it to, here's the other NAS, sync at whatever point in time, and they will self-replicate. You don't have to do anything, which is amazing and cost-effective, especially if you do a lot of commercial work, programming, any code-based stuff, anything you want to keep for long-term storage. Or you can have, let's say, exporting to tape periodically from your NAS, which is, of course, also a lot more cheaper nowadays, and I'll get into some of the costs of those devices as well as the tape cost. So my epic fail on local disk is near full. I'm going to copy everything to my RAID. Problem. Well, that's great, except for when you have a drive fail, and basically the standard approach to swapping out a RAID 5 drive is you pull it out, you stick in another drive, you put it in, except for how does the NAS or device respond when you do that. If it ever says initialize, do not hit it, because somebody did, and now they have 4 disks of 0. Totally wiped out all their data, and there is no backup because they said this is the best thing since sliced bread, nothing will ever go wrong. A 4 terabyte drive is pretty damn cheap, and you could have backed it up to another device, because he only had maybe, give or take, 4, 5 terabytes. No, not a big deal. So you can get cheap drives just as a backup. 2 is better than none. 1 is nothing. And it doesn't matter if it's a RAID 5, 6, or anything else. So if you don't have archiving, you're going to eventually have issues. And everybody says, it won't happen to me. I'm doing it right. And then it doesn't turn out right. Tape devices are nice. They're made for long term. They allow snapshots of all your data over a period of time. You can do data deduplication in a lot of cases, so you don't keep writing the same stuff over and over. It creates an index for that. It's automated, so you don't have to actually think about it, but you do have to, of course, like anything, keep track of the logs, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do, and of course we'll get into testing that as well. Epic fail. doctor's office had a technician, you know, they set up this backup exec thing, backup, oh yeah, servers doing his thing. Well, the doctor thought he was paying for a service that never happened. For 2 years in business, or the guy was in business for a number of years, but the thing stopped in like 2009, right? In 2000, I think it was late 12, maybe going into 13, they had server failure. They needed to get back their data. The guy screwed up the RAID. They had to go back to tape. They said the tape was their, what they needed. Well, we found out it hasn't been written to in 2 years because nobody checked the log. Nobody did a disaster recovery test. Nobody did anything. And the guy was paying for this, of course. There was legality involved, and we'll go with that. So always check your tape backups. Make sure that they work. Check the logs. Just keep an eye on it. So a little backup and recovery planning. Creating a backup plan, figuring out a backup plan. There are two different things. Basic types of backups. We're going to select devices and media that match what we need. Common backup solution, the pros and cons between everything, and of course, most important, test your recovery plan. Just like everything, backing up is insurance for all your mission critical data. It doesn't matter what happens. Somebody hitting the delete key on a NAS, and now it goes, if you don't have the NAS recycle bin active, it goes into oblivion, which means you got to do a whole RAID recovery read-in, and that just costs money. So basically, a general rule is when the shit happens, then, if you don't have two forms of the backups, it's going to cost you, plain and simple. And depending upon whether it's disk to tape, depending upon the method and, what you plan on restoring, you could pay $1,000, you could pay $14,000. Depends upon the problem. If you get into SANs or, bigger RAID boxes and you have to restore every disk into an image of them all to be able to reconstitute the entire RAID, well, that's what you have to do, and that's going to cost you. So make sure you mitigate all this in the front end and just allow for data growth over time, and then you should be fine. And it does take time to create these plans, just like it takes time to figure out where you want to go to dinner and what you're going to have. The who, what, when, where, why, and some hows are questions that one should ask. Like, who's responsible for this? If it's in a corporation, whether you're a support tech doing your standard contract to other clients, whether you're doing it at home, it doesn't really matter. Find out who's responsible and then get on it. Important is, what's important to you? Is it just my documents, or is it something, you're going to archive over time, pictures, whatever? Figure that out. And what does the data contain? You could have spreadsheets, maybe they're passwords, maybe they're, W-9 forms, IRS audit, whatever. You want to make sure that that data gets backed up on a continuous basis or from an archival basis over time. How often does something change? That's critical. If it changes a lot, then of course you need to have some type of revisioning, something you can go back to if something was inaccurate or gets corrupted, and then you can restore it from an earlier time. That's something that needs to be done. How quickly can you recover the data? That's going to go into our recovery plan that we'll talk about. But depending upon the device that you're copying it to will determine how quickly you can actually recover and put that data back onto its original location, whether it's a local system to corporation or whatever. And the next thing is very important. Do you have the software and equipment to perform backup? If your server crashes, you're not going to have the backup software. You're not going to have a server to put it back onto. So the question is, do you have a redundant backup server to do this? Do you have to outsource now your RAID or backup software or tapes to some company to be able to restore what you should be able to restore yourself? So that kind of pre-planning is very necessary. So what is the best time to schedule backups? That's, of course, based on how you use your machine or machines, and how the network that you're backing up data from operates. So anything during operational time of a business, of course, depending upon your type of network, whether you're using 100 or gigi or 10G, whatever the network infrastructure is that can withstand the bandwidth of the amount of data that you're going to transform and move from one place to another, has to take into account. Now, if you're going to store data off-site, which is always good, if you're a business or even running your own home business, you can actually encrypt your data, put it on an external, stick it in a hole, a bank, or some location that's off-site that will actually store your information. Now, the caveat of that is how quickly can you access it during whatever business hours they have, like an Iron Mountain or something like that. How can you get that data out to be able to restore the data properly and quickly back to its original form? What structure will the data take? This is a really big thing. Before and after the restoration, a lot of people don't think about, well, I'm just going to copy my documents, but is it going to copy everything from the root and give you structure, or is it just going to copy the folders, which means you have to restore those back to the specific profile location? And it doesn't matter whether it's on Unix, Mac, or anything like that, because sometimes the system files or whatever are specific for that given profile, which will then cause problems if you're not paying attention to what it is and where it is that you're backing up from. Backup Exec a while back used to restore registry data. It used, software, and it'll restore things back to the way they were when it was backed up, which is dangerous. If you happen to check something that you don't want, you can put yourself to an earlier state, and you could basically make software that was there disappear because you can't get it back once you do that. So you got to think about how it's going to go back onto the system. Even if you're doing a rebuild on a system that crashed. So if you have a server crash, how does the data go back onto it? How do you get the shares back to where they're supposed to be? What was it like beforehand? You have to think about that, have all that noted, so that just in case anything ever happens, you have documentation, and that's key. Here's some basic backup types. Anybody who's done tape backup or even standard OS, from the local system on up. Standard backups, full backups, copies, differentials, incrementals, and daily backups are all based on the data that you're dealing with, and also whether or not those files are locked, how important are they, and when you want to do it. So it's based upon how you use your system or systems. So you have to match these given rules to how you do your business. A couple things that are out there that I use a lot are real-time backups and virtual machine and imaging technologies. Real-time backup basically is I work on a file, I close the file, it notes the change of that given watch folder that I've created. And it detects it based on date and time stamp, attribute, also deletion events. You can have that if you want. And once those are triggered, it will actually copy that data from the source to wherever your target is, and it's instant. So based on, of course, the size of the file, that's the time factor. So if you're, let's say, working on a virtual machine, you shut that down. If it's 150 gig, it's going to take, depending upon their bandwidth, could be up to 2 hours to back that up, or an hour depending upon the speed of your system. And also images being the fact that if you do image snapshots of using like Acronis or some other program and storing them either local or on a server and then backing those up, that of course takes time, but it's also great because you retain the entire environment of those particular operating systems, so it's easier to restore to a given point and then restore the backup of just the changed data, and then you'll be back up in probably, if you're talking about standard PCs, about half an hour. So it's a great tool to have. A lot of things when you're selecting backup devices, of course, are capacity, reliability, extensibility, speed of those devices, and a lot of people bring into costs. Hard disk space obviously has dropped significantly, so that shouldn't be too much of a factor, but I see people constantly complain about that as being a big problem. But they, when you're spending $1,200 on a recovery, that's a necessity for their business or whatever, guess what? That $300 or $99 drive doesn't seem too bad right now. So keep that in mind. And that goes to part of the start of this, is that when you're looking at growth of your original investment, this is something that plays into it. You're going to pay up front, but the long-term reliability of your data will be secured. So some common backup solutions, we were talking about disk drives, your external medias, which are direct attached storage, NAS devices, SANs appliances, of course for medium to large businesses. The dollar size could be there. Tape devices, auto loaders or linear tape systems that can be written to quickly, and those of course can be recovered quite fast. Also, cloud-based services, upload costs will differ from the download, so those are things to think about when you're purchasing the type of service from these, whatever they are, crash plan, this or that. These things, when you're pulling data, even off of like Amazon backup, when you're pulling data down, they actually charge you more based on what it is that you're doing. Uploads is a trickle effect, and it's a one-way, so they don't really, that's part of your service there. But if you're downloading huge quantities of data, you'll see a bill. So the pros for these devices: hard disks are relatively short amount of time. They're fast to restore data. The cost per terabyte is clearly reasonable in today's market. There's 6 terabyte drives out there now for $300. Granted, the density factor is huge, but the reliability is still in question on a lot of these larger disks. They're scalable, so you can always add more, which is great. Tape devices, which is great because they're hardware, software combination, you automatically back stuff up. They're scalable, long-term, cost per unit, as we see here for like an LTO5 tape, is like $25 for 3 terabytes compressed. That's not too bad, especially if you're going to archive stuff for long-term, and that's restorable at any point on any machine. Granted, of course, software being already on somebody else's system. LTO6, which is relatively new, they're $51 at the kind of like the medium-low style tapes, but you can store 6.25 terabytes on each tape compressed. I mean, per cost on that is pretty cheap. They do work in the linear tape file systems that are available. So, I mean, plus, of course, they have built-in encryption chips, so you can also use that feature. Cloud-based services, great. You can access them anywhere, and they're automatic backup through the client-server relationship. So your cons, of course, both from hard disk and tape standpoint, you have infrastructure costs, maintenance contracts, monthly power bills to deal with. So those are things to be looked at long term. Cloud-based services are great for access and service fees. They're not in your control, for one. If you do not pay, you will lose access to that till you ante up money. I've heard some stories from different vendors that have done that. People don't like it, but that's just the nature of those services. They are there to make money. Download bandwidth is, of course, higher than upload costs. And, of course, connectivity, depending upon where you're getting the data from, like if you're doing Wi-Fi at some Starbucks, is going to be a heck of a lot slower than doing it in a business that has multiple T1 connections. Also, there's no TNO compliance, which means trust no one, meaning, is their encryption good enough for your business? Should you trust their encryption through their software, or should you not? That's a personal choice that must be investigated, and it's up to you. Now, testing and recovery plan. Now, this is pretty simple. If you don't test what you back up, you may not get what you think. If you don't know or track the logs of what's being backed up, how do you know it's being backed up? Do you look at date stamps? Do you have a running log file? Do you have something that sends it to your email account that something occurred?
And even then, many years ago, I bought a tape drive from a company. Religiously backed up everything. After a few months, somebody said, "Oh, I need something off the backup." I say, "Great, we're all backed up." Tried to recover the data. The tape had nothing on it. It was all zeros. The manufacturer of this thing, the guy that sold it to me, said, "Oh yeah, we knew about that. Go to Fry's and buy a new copy of our software." It's like, okay, why do I send in the registration card if you're not going to tell me that your crap doesn't work? But please go on.
Indeed. Yes. Well, that's why Rule 4, basically test, check, observe, and do it again. Repetition, basically, if you're doing disaster recovery, if you know where your shortfalls are, then the quicker you can get the data on and your downtime will be shortened. Especially for mission critical state, systems, whether they're websites, whether they're, your corporate email, or even your own personal email if you're running your own business. So always double check, triple check, make sure wherever it's going that it's actually there, and then make sure it's being replicated to another device. What's that? Yeah, make sure there's data on the tape for sure. Well, the thing is, see, most likely if his was creating a log file, it could have lied to him. Okay, so the thing is that you need to actually have the tape software read the tape and validate that it actually has a tape index that it can present to you, and that you can actually restore to a different location, target location, and make sure it restores properly.
Preferably on a different tape drive, on a different PC, different office, in a different state.
But yes, you can test those facilities out as well. Well, checksum is part of the restoration process. It does all that.
How big is your backup? Let's say like it's MD5 checksum or checksum.
It varies based on software that you're using, whether it's something disk related to tape related. So each one uses a different method. So, which we'll look at here in just a second. So, commercial, proprietary, and freeware software. This list that I'm going to put on the screen here basically covers all the different OSs and other stats, but it does not contain a lot of software that actually is out there, like Nova Backup, Backup Exec, versions, and so forth, which is kind of interesting, but not surprising, because there's just so many. So this is a cached version of it. So this is like the free software that's out there. You can see what language they're available for, whether they're command line based. It also shows, this is a Wikipedia page, and it shows somebody's been updating the last update field, which is kind of cool. And you can get this online. We'll provide the link. And also the proprietary software that's out there that does continuous backup protection, OS, whether you're doing it from a GUI or command line, which is nice. It has a lot of, it's a great starting point, but it depends upon what you're looking for. So you can just go to Wikipedia, just type in list of backup software, and that will show up. So performing level 1 recoveries on drives, and of course flash drives you can kind of throw in there as well. Flash drives are quite, when they stop working, it's pretty immediate, just from my connectivity standpoint. Identifying problem, and of course some recovery software that you can get commercially off the shelf that will work for you at a relatively inexpensive cost. So common level 1 indicators of just drives right now is, let's say you had a XP system or a some Linux system, and over time you think, oh, I'm just going to defrag the drive. It kind of increases the speed, but over the years, it's just getting slower. That means that you're starting to indicate media degradation over time, and that eventually it will fail to boot. So, and that could go into system area. It could be in part of the boot process in the boot sector, and then one day it will not boot. And then, of course, you'll have to go in through the recovery process and try to recover your own stuff, hopefully that you have a secondary machine to do this. While booting, you can do the BIOS or the OS will give certain types of errors. The common ones that we see basically are blue screens of death, and then they clear up after you rebooted. Well, that indicates that there's a system file that is in an area that is getting damaged, and either you can run a HDD regenerator or some other utility that will move those bad blocks around, and that should fix the problem in that respect. Or if it can't, and the file is already damaged, then you're toast. It's going to basically keep presenting continuous blue screens of death till the infinitum, and then you're going to have to recover from that. Basically, error messages saying that the disk is not bootable, which is proceeds into, you have the OS or the MFT or track 0 is damaged and due to bad sectors, and you're just, what do I do now? One or more boot files show up missing or damaged. Again, this is something we talked about. And it's actually presenting to you in a log, or let's say if you're doing a Linux boot and all of a sudden it craps out in a line item that is trying to start a service, and you're going, well, why is a service corrupt? Is it damaged? Is it, is it the kernel problem? Is it, maybe it's your disk? Got to think about that. And do you have backup files of those system file locations as a repository? Random errors while copying. So let's say if you're copying files from an external to your internal disk or vice versa, and you're going, well, why is it erroring out when I know I just worked on it or I think it's good? Well, maybe the disk area is bad below it and needs to be repaired. Hooking up external storage, and all of a sudden it says, hey, I need to format you. Well, don't format it. That's a bad thing. Okay? The interfaces on externals are USB, and most recovery software will not work with direct attached USB devices. So you have to deshell it, get to the SATA bus, and then run it as a secondary drive to be able to recover that data. So USB drives. So when you have flash drives that fail, a couple things. It has obviously a driver chip on it that basically interfaces and controls the data flow to the bus. And then also it reads the cell structure of the flash that's behind it. Well, depends upon which side of the fence it dies on. You could have it where it connects, but you can't get to the flash, or it doesn't connect and doesn't show up anymore. Yeah. Well, that's just other stuff, okay, which I'll get into. But for flash, depending on the type of chip they're using, whether if it's surface mount with leads or no leads, where it's just bubbles of solder and they heat treat it onto there, those are pretty much undoable for most people. If it has leads, you can basically desolder the flash, but here's the caveat. You have to have an exact USB stick, that same manufacturer, same size, and if you can desolder the flash gently without damaging it or overheating the pins, causing damage or data loss to the cells, then you can strip it off a good one, move it over, and it should work. Now, if it's the bubble surface mount like they have on SSDs, and you try to heat it up, you can damage the chip and you're toast. So those are pretty much a lost cause. And then once again, if you don't have it on your main system or have a duplicate copy, it's just, you might as well forget it. Start over. Do everything from memory and put it back out there. So some top-rated software that's out there, from my opinion, basically is based on the file system that you're dealing with and how you want to recover the data. Like File Scavenger has a variety of different platforms that it supports, and it does it quite well. They are commercial and they're relatively inexpensive. From if you're doing it a one-timer, then a lot of people think that it's not worth it, but I've seen a lot of people expend money on it, and it's done well for them. So RStudio is a little bit different, that it has nowadays in their version 7, X versions, they have a reverse RAID support. Basically, you can read in images from disks and then take those images, and it will construct the RAID structure for you automatically. So if you had RAID 5 3-disk, so you read in the 2 good disks as images, you work on the third to try to image as much as you can out of that structure, depending upon what happened with it, or if you have to do data recovery on that, then you can get that recovered and then take that image and then add it to the third, and then you can actually restore all the data once it all syncs together. You can actually get structure once you get to that point. It's very good. It works really well. A lot of the Linux boxes out there, whether it's a Drobo, whether it's your you know, anything that has 2 drives and has a Linux backbone, basically will be XFS, or sometimes they'll use ext4, depending upon who the heck does it and their methodology of how to write the data to those disks. The externals are good because the ROM in there writes to a local flash of the serial number of the drives that were inside the unit. So if you take another drive and you pop it in there, it will know that it doesn't belong to it, and it will ask you what you want to do with it. So that's pretty amazing. Except for, of course, the Drobo story that I told you earlier, where the guy basically hit initialize, and then all bets are off. So never initialize anything. Always add the disk in the interface to the array, and then have it format and basically do a rebuild, either at the BIOS level if it's an internal RAID, or if it is a user interface to the RAID itself, or an external NAS. Each one will have a different method of doing it. Make sure you read upon how that works. Here's some more proprietary software. GDB is nice. They haven't progressed more than Windows platform. On the Mac end, to do disks recovery or some disk manipulation and stuff, you have to have the original CD or DVDs for the Mac to be able to boot into a mode where you can actually do something. There are safe modes you can get into using function keys and stuff, which most people know, and try to repair or fix the problem. Windows, Vista 7 and 8, they do allow you to create rescue CDs to try to repair certain functionality that's in there. Now with the UEFI BIOS with Windows 8, which creates an EFI partition, they kind of collaborate so that you can actually try to do a recovery, but sometimes that stuff doesn't work, and there's a really big problem with GPT and EFI and all that other stuff. There's tools are still in their infancy for a lot of that, especially if you're doing SSD replacements to larger drives that were spindle motor based. So if you're going from 500 to a 120, there's a bit of manipulation that has to be done, and that took me like 3 days of research and about 8 programs later, and I had epic fails of most of them, and I found one that was, it's called Markham Reflect. I just happened to catch a YouTube video of some guy in England doing this, and he just kind of showed how to basically transfer data from one to another, because they provide in their free software version that it does cloning. Go figure, of Windows 8, which creates the EFI boot partition properly. Everything else, whether it's Ghost, Acronis, all these say that they do it, but it didn't work for me. Well, that's all I can say. And Acronis is great because it was supposed to resize the partitions for you. It writes it out, and you plug it in, and guess what? Your computer says it has a problem and tries to correct it, and it never will fix it. It's just the most frustrating thing you've ever come into. On the Mark and Reflect, the only thing you have to do is you have to add all the partitions. There's usually 5, 6 partitions that it creates. The FI, there's a couple of NTFS partitions. There may be an empty partition that it creates for space, and then there's the master partition where everything is loaded for your OS, and then there's a couple trailing ones for whatever reason that it manufactures. But I had to manually manipulate the partition size of the main partition because it was 400 gig originally, and I had to bring that down to about 100, and then the leftover 20 that was available, I had to calculate the size about 6 or 7 times, dragging those partitions down till it fit, because I didn't want to leave any excess, data empty space on an SSD. There's no, you're paying enough for it already, so use it. And once I got that done, 45 minutes worth of copying, it produced a perfect bootable Windows 8 hard drive. I was happy. Customer was happy. I'm happy. And I learned a lot doing it. So, just a little note. Here's some free software, but it does not work on GPT partitions, most of these. So just a caveat, it's too new. There's Hiron's Boot Disk, which has been out there for a very long time. Ultimate Boot CD, which has been a SourceForge project and has been around forever. Linux boot distros that are out there to manipulate both track 0, partition, and OS structures by booting into a shell, and you can access the disk that way. And of course, the Hiron's has more than one tool to manipulate those types of structures on disk. If you're doing repair, rewriting a track 0, so sometimes that will get corrupted, and that's a simple fix. To partition damage, which can be repaired if you can rewrite the header properly, and of course OS structure based on corrupted files can be replaced, assuming that the area of the disk is not damaged. So we've reached the end, and also a picture of one of Google's head ends that they have, the data storage units. As you can see, they are huge and pretty impressive. And you can see on there that there are curtains on the back side. So basically what they're doing is they're funneling. You think that this whole thing is air conditioned. It is to a degree, but they basically put these curtains around the units, and they duct the air down, which reduces energy costs by 60% because it's more targeted. Now the surrounding air is a lot hotter, but if you put your hand in those server farm areas where they have all the servers, it's cold. It's because they have funnel channels on everything, and so it's quite efficient. And they've been doing this through a lot of head ends that I've been in, so, and colo locations.
Where is this?
This one I don't know. All I did was
closed location.
How do they back up that?
basically they have them in different states and sometimes different countries. Everything's done over fiber and self-replicating. It's also self-healing to a degree based on, of course, there are humans there. It's not robotic. So if they do have servers or disk crashes, they are automatically alerted in the facilities.
It's not if, it's when.
Yeah, it's always when. Because the thing is that Google also keeps track of all their drive statistics, even though they don't make them public, of what their failure rate is. So it's an internal. They've released some way back in like 2010 or something like that. Yeah, but the thing is, didn't disclose make or manufacturer. So they wanted to keep the level playing field out there.
And they also lumped in motherboard failure as well, because a lot of times the hard drive you find is the motherboard.
Yeah, the PCBs have issues, electrical, whatnot. So, but you can find those statistics out there, but it's not really going to give you anything to say, oh, should I buy, Seagate versus Western Digital versus Samsung, those kinds of things, because the statistics really aren't out there. You just have to look at the number of sales of each of those. And currently, right now, there are 3 manufacturers of drives. Samsung in Korea, you have Western Digital that has bought out everybody that Seagate hasn't. So anytime you see a Mac store or Hitachi, those are Western Digital or Seagate. There are, technically, if they named them all the same, they would call that, what? Monopoly. Yeah, but that doesn't happen in the real world. So they try to keep the names the same, even though that they're already owned by the same company. So now it would be a super, monolithic thing if Seagate and Western Digital joined up. Then they would have 100%, well, 99.9% of the market. Samsung is not that big in the whole scheme of things.
So you're saying pay attention to how many drives are sold. Are you suggesting then that we should avoid the manufacturer with the largest sales volume?
It's based on the specific lot and size of the specific unit. Think of it as cars that have certain recalls, right? Same with drives. You could have a plant in Thailand that somebody decided, we're going to go with this particular controller chip or resistor, and it's different from 2 other plants making the same exact drive, but different boards, because each manufacturer or each location actually will have different board colors and different notation. So you really have to know what those are, and those are highly kept, to themselves. There is a method to their madness, put it that way. So if a certain lot is having a problem, then you can actually see that by postings online. But the thing is, a lot of people will put part numbers, but you need the details of the entire label information to find out that information. So.
I hear radio ads for Carbonite.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about them?
They have money. Hence, they have radio ads.
Yes.
How do you feel about Glacier? Google's Glacier.
TNO, man. They're not TNO compliant.
Trust no one.
Carbonite is not TNO compliant. Dropbox, even though they present themselves, even Google Drive or whatever all these things are, they say they have encryption. Well, that's great. But who has the keys? They do. They do. You don't have the keys. It's like saying, hey, police officer, here's the key to my house. You can walk in anytime that I'm not there or when I'm there. Just come on in.
You're talking about Switzerland.
Anybody. Doesn't really matter. The thing is, if you encrypt your own stuff using what data is valuable to you, because all information is gathered, and if it's something personal to you that you don't want anybody else to have, don't put it out there unencrypted. Yes, but it's the best we've got. I mean, the thing is, you can trust the math on a lot of things. It's just whether or not somebody has a hardware key that will undo the math, right? And,
Or a backdoor.
however that plays out, yes.
There's certain
Yes.
foreign governments that were really unhappy when they learned how much Microsoft put into their software in terms of letting other people see your stuff.
Well, yeah. And the thing is, if you don't have access to the code, even in all the open source stuff, even Linux has had bugs in it since, that's been around 20 years. I mean, you've seen a lot of the patches now for different services that have been around and working I forgot what the heck it was, just recently that they've done 2 patches on that were major holes in the security model for SSL and a couple other things in their modules. And they've been around forever. And who examines the code? I mean, you use it, you trust it, but unless you dig in and look at it yourself and know that it is so, what are you going to do?
Right. The interesting thing about that, though, is partly GoToFail and Microsoft had one for IIS and Store. They all failed more or less about the same time, and these were all bugs that were introduced more or less at the same time. So it's kind of interesting to see like that timeline. It took that long for code inspection to finally get around and catch up to when the code was actually active.
You got to remember, like, the GoToFail thing was found by not Apple. And it was just somebody's curiosity that, like everything, finds this anomaly and they say, why? Why did this happen? And then you got somebody that actually digs into the code or posts it to some place that actually will examine the code, and then all of a sudden you're going, well, why is this here? You have to throw that out there.
Mistakes happen.
There are mistakes, and then there are mistakes.
There's very
On the GoToFail thing, the compilers that they were using at the time should have found that problem.
You can't. It's syntactically correct C code. That there's no way you could have possibly detected that as an error. The only way you could have detected
Yes
that
and no.
That is the only way you could have detected it. We were having this huge conversation on the 4th mailing list about this. And there's very insightful, very large websites that discuss that. And
yeah.
This is a topic that I work in every day. I'm a quality engineer. That's my job. There's no way you could have automatically detected GoToFail. Not with C. You could with a functional language. You could with Module 2. But you couldn't with C. It's just not possible.
And even code review is not scalable.
Exactly, and that's why it's not.
Well,
it's because you've got
think of
hundreds of thousands of lines.
Look at Windows. I mean, Windows is, how big is that now? Like, something, hundreds of millions of lines of code done by how many different, I'm going to say this, and whether you agree or disagree, that programs express the personalities of the people who write it, because the syntax of the person who writes it has a certain method, right? When you take one person and then you export his job to someplace else, and now you have 4 people writing the same code, there's no similarities, right? Every one of those people have a different style. You're going to get unknown outcome versus somebody who wrote a single, the entire module themselves. Well, even if you have coding guidelines, somebody that you know that's next to you, unless they're forced to by whip and chain, will not have the same style and methodology that you have. If you do, you are lucky.
Yeah, I was going to say, in every work that I've worked at that does have coding guidelines, whips and chains are involved.
Yes. So if there's somebody who actually maintains security, structure, and the repository and the check-in and check-out process of code, so that when that event of the GoToFail got entered, they should have known exactly when that event occurred. and by whom it was done by, right?
But what does that buy?
Just
What does that information buy?
it just
After the fact.
buys you information. That's all it is.
Buys you blame. And that's all it buys you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't solve the lawsuits. It just buys you blame.
It doesn't help that much for the next one.
No, it doesn't.
No, but the thing is, when they're that epic, then they can produce negative feedback, of course.
I went to a talk about a month ago by this the CEO from this company, Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a software consulting company. They write software for clients. And they have a very interesting way of software development that I hadn't seen before. Maybe so many other people have. But they have teams of people write software, but it's like 2 people per computer. Yes, writing the same code.
That's the extreme program.
Yeah, okay.
That's paired
I wasn't
programming.
aware of that
Yeah,
before.
that's actually how I got interested in the whole software methodology business.
Explain. So it's actually a very interesting strategy. They have the client come in, and the client picks what's to be done, and they write out elements of the code, like user interface and stuff on paper, and the client decides, what parts to do, and then they assign it to a team of these parts to a team of 2 people, and this team, 2 people per computer, they work on it, and every week they change teams. And then the client comes in, and he is the one that tests the code and make sure that it's working and it's acceptable. And they go through rounds of it. So apparently it's pretty successful.
There's a brilliant book. It's not that thick. It's about maybe a quarter of an inch thick by a gentleman who invented that process called Ken Beck. It's called XP Explained. Strongly recommended.
He also did test-driven development, which helps also.
Yeah.
And you do both of them, and it's now becoming acceptance test-driven development. You can get probably as close as you're ever going to get to perfect code. Now, perfect code doesn't exist.
Neither does secure code.
You can get secure code to a level.
Yes.
But there will always be a risk.
Always.
And the bugs that do exist are almost invariably in the spec and not so much in the code. That's the thing and a lot of people got confused about this because they think, oh, TDD lets you write perfect code, and perfect code doesn't exist, therefore TDD is That's actually not the case.
Correct.
What TDD does is it lets you write code to the spec, and it actually is to the spec.
Right. You test the spec, but you've got to test early. The earlier in the architecture, as far as you can get, is where you've got to test.
The thing is a comparative software too, no? Is there a perfect comparative?
No, same problem. Use multiple.
So here's the thing.
So they have a very complex
So here's the thing with
thing
that.
to compare, like you have with C
So
languages, it can go south in any thousands of different ways.
they can, but they don't in practice because they've got a ton of code review on them too. But here's the deal. Here's the deal with TDD and with extreme programming. You must, full stop, you must write one test first. Before you write any production code, you write one test. You exercise that test and you verify that that test fails. Then you write the production code just enough to make that test work. Then you run the test again and you make sure that that test succeeds. When you've completed those 4 steps, lather, rinse, and repeat,
And as long as you do that, you will end up with a working system that has 100% code path coverage by definition. Because, it has to. It has to, because if there's any paths that are not exercised, it will show up in a failing test. Because remember, you have to fail the test first. That's the process.
True. If you would, the problem is the right test, right code that satisfies the test is almost never done all the time. You always want to write more code.
Okay, stop. Stop right there. The reason I'm going to stop you right there is because I'm going to tell you that's not extreme programming.
Correct.
Correct. If what this company is doing is extreme programming, they will never do that. And if you do that, you will be fired.
And I agree with you. What I'm saying is that rule gets stretched. At a deadline, at everything is stretches.
Well, this is why companies like to say we're agile, not we do extreme programming. Because people like the extreme programming community back in the early 2000s finally said, no, this is enough. If you're not doing extreme programming, don't say you're doing extreme programming. And the companies were like, okay. So
let me ask you a question based on this, either the agile version of it or the extreme version of it. What is the development time of a particular application, that some client is trying to put out there versus?
it is typically measured in months. It's very, very fast. Especially if you do pair programming, because you've got immediate code review as you're typing it into the IDE. But even if you're not doing that, even if all you're doing is just TDD, what you're doing is you're time boxing developing iterations. It's an iteration-based system. And so if a company says we need a product by November 26, 2016, then by November 26, 2016, you have something that you can ship, even if it's not like complete in the sense of the complete list of features.
Right.
But it will at least have the most important to the customer, the most important set of features that the customer prioritized.
And in fact, you will have something earlier that's not unshippable. The whole idea is that you always have something shippable.
Okay.
You constantly have something that works.
Well, that's
waterfall where, at the last minute, they
well,
turn the switch and it works.
So basically, these types of programming is not the kind where we're going to send back an error message back to the, let's say, Microsoft, using everybody as beta testers or alpha testers of their stuff, garnishing all this data from all these terminals, reporting back to them and saying, this is what's wrong with us.
If that's in the spec, then that's what gets put in the code.
I know, but the thing is that a lot of the problems that I've seen, I question, was the code ever even written properly to begin with, and tested, versus like, why is it crashing, and over here it's not crashing, but over there it's crashing, and it's like, what the heck is going on here?
So I remember back in the early 2000s, extreme programmers and CMM level 5 people constantly butting heads over each other's processes. Oh, your process is a liquid chain and bondage discipline and process
and we like it that way.
Yeah. the funny thing is they were arguing with each other over how much leather and whips and chains and whatnot you need in order to implement these processes. But it turns out in both cases, whether you're doing clean room or you're doing personal software process by Humphrey himself, or if you're doing XP, you have to have a significant amount of discipline in order to keep these processes up. If you don't, if you fail in any way from that, you cannot
according to the trademark for extreme programming, you
Sure.
cannot call yourself extreme programming. That's why everybody else says, we're agile or we're lean. Like,
But even in that case, there's a ton of lip service that isn't really following.
Right. The reason why I brought that up is because in the coming into the 2000 era here, I knew a lot of people that were software testers, and companies decided they were such an expense. You know, we don't need that many.
Yeah, something Dave said. Oh, the customer comes in and tests it. He's the guy that decides whether. The customer's not an expert in software testing.
I see what you're getting at.
You know what I'm saying.
Now I do.
And Microsoft did the same thing.
Yeah, that's a mistake.
And this is why I'm saying, you know, why is it that error reporting is now such the biggest return factor in turning everybody's machine into a test case? That's what I'm saying.
So
Because they have to.
yeah, I mean they pretty much have to.
It doesn't scale.
And the other thing too also is at least in the case of extreme programming, you have one on-site customer. In the company, you have in place of the on-site customer, you have someone called the product manager, as distinct from the project manager, which is really interesting when people talk about PMs because you have to wonder who they're talking about. His role is to represent the symbolic customer of the product. The question is, when you have a product that's diversely used as Windows, where you have one person who believes in strong security, but the other person just says, you know, I just want to use it as an appliance, and the third person is like, I'm going to be using this in bioinformatics. How does the PM represent all three classes of people? And it's very, very difficult to do. So that's where the data acquisition aspect of the product comes in.
Well, I can see the trade-offs for sure, and you know, even in just in Windows, they have different lines, you know, from small business to, you know, standard, and then enterprise. Each one is a different class. Whether even you're doing Linux, you know, let's say Red Hat, you can get, you know, Red Hat. But if you want the enterprise version, you know, that's a whole different ball game. Has different code. Whether you're looking at, you know, Oracle's, you know, wonderful operating system they have for their head ends and stuff like that they're using with the self-healing technologies and all that other happy stuff. You go, okay, how much am I have to pay?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's theoretical. It's, the idea of methodology that you write the test first, and then you write the program. That requires the test program to represent of what the customer wants. And generally, it's not known.
Yeah.
It's
right.
Then you
right.
not even to the requirement spec. How well is your requirement spec?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That test program.
That's
is
why.
a big deal.
Yeah, I was going to say that's why extreme programming really isn't used in most corporate settings, because you have to have that one customer on site. Who is the visionary for the
Because
product.
you know,
Right.
you cannot assume that the customer knows all aspects of it.
Right. Now that being
You
said,
have to assume that that's required.
that being
If you know exactly what if the customer can put down
right,
exactly what he wants, then you can write perfect program.
now that being said, there are bits and pieces of software that are reused so heavily that you can just assume, like you say, with correctness, what the customer wants. For example, if I'm running Microsoft Movie Maker, I don't want it to use 3 times more memory than it should to be able to edit 2 pieces of film, for example, than it needs to. So that dictates, for example, what data structures you use and what kind of user interface you have. So from that, you can derive, you basically do what's called derived requirements or derived user stories, where you basically say, okay, we can write tests to make sure that this never happens, knowing that the customer will automatically agree with this if he had the requisite technical knowledge. So for example, my Kestrel, I've written it using two styles of code. One is test-driven development. The other one is clean-room development. So one, you could say is big design up front, although it's not, but you can call it big design up front. The other one is more of an agile approach, and they both mesh perfectly together. And I have used, and both of them involve strong use.
Do you know why?
What's that?
Because you're the only one writing it.
That's right. Because
So you have continuity of, right. You're both the customer and the developer at the same time.
Right.
But then the question is you having a customer with the vision, the structure in mind, the layout, how the GUI and things are supposed to work at the meticulous level, has to all be defined either beforehand or change those requirements as time goes by, right?
Right, but I'm saying, if someone says, I want to use this product with a keyboard, for example, odds are pretty good that if the keyboard has a shift key, he's going to expect it to produce capital letters. Right? So there's certain patterns that you can apply. You can still apply. Like if you look at most of the software quality issues, it's fairly rare for them to be outright humongous, ginormous bugs. It's usually the small details that they get wrong that causes untold hours of misery trying to do the basic things.
A lot of it are, buffer checks, right? You're feeding data into something, and then all of a sudden you hit a bounds problem, and the program crashes.
Yeah.
I was dealing with, let's say, an access problem. This program was actually written in Microsoft Access. It has, a standard GUI. It looks great. It does all this database stuff. But guess what? One little flaw. And it was Generation 8, by the way. When it crashed, it took out the main database. And it goes, oh, we can't function now because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it doesn't exist in the trash bin. It doesn't exist anywhere. It obliterates the file.
Yeah.
So as long as you have a backup, you're okay. But it's happened more than once.
Yeah.
And you go, well, how severe of a crash to have an open file when something occurs, whatever that error is, to obliterate the open file?
Yeah.
What is that?
I can absolutely guarantee you that Microsoft Access was written with waterfall style. I can absolutely guarantee you, and I know this because Steve McConnell, who wrote all the Code Complete books and whatnot, used to be a big wig on Microsoft Office products, said so. Access is not a software product that you want to be using.
I agree. But I'm just using that as an example, of events that occur because somebody believes that the environment that they're writing in is, said.
Now, if you wrote tests, even if it's just happy path tests, before you wrote the production code, there's a reason why that second letter is called design, test-driven design.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're writing your code and you just wrote a test for, say, the spec says Microsoft Access caps at 64,000 records, for example, and you sit there and you say, okay, well, what happens if we add this, this 655 preset? What happens if we add this 65,000, whatever records?
Sure.
You can write the test for that. You can say these files should continue to exist.
Well, the thing is, it's unclear, and even in the log files of whatever crash, there's no indication of why it did what it did.
But again, that's waterfall. What I'm saying.
I know. I'm just saying. But the thing is, it can be any program. It could be any, cloud-based whatever. if you don't have a backup, and I'm going to go back to my little spiel here, if you don't have a backup of whatever it is that you were just working on, you're out of luck, right?
You always have backups anyway.
Exactly.
But what I'm saying is that with TDD, since you're actively focused on writing that happy path text, and you've just written the production code that just satisfies that, now would be a great time to write some negative tests for that. Say, you know, what happens if I add, you know, such and such? You know,
the same thing where I'm at. I did a bunch of positive tests. I said, yes, I do this, yes, this, that, I do. Then I go along and I say, okay, I do something stupid. The error response that I do.
Right.
Yeah, did it have a, you know, abnormal execution, or, you know, did it crash your stack? What the heck happened? You know, those are all things that you got to look into for sure. And you know, that's pretty interesting. I'll have to look into the extreme programming stuff. I know that topic came up a while ago, but it's obviously being more now promoted and used for not only better potential software, but rapid development of software.
It's interesting that a heartbleed bug in particular, let alone the go-to-fail bug and the IIS bug, but the heartbleed bug in particular is singularly responsible for making people re-examine both software development process as well as the authoring tools that they're using. And it looks like it's for the better, because a lot more people now are demanding languages that are automatically checked in some capacity. So like Go, which is what I work in, but there's also Dart, there's Rust, you know, there's all these new languages coming out. OCaml is an object-oriented dialect of ML. It used to be relatively obscure except in safety critical systems. Now people are considering it for desktop applications. I mean, like...
Really?
Yeah, really. I'm not shaking. On the .NET platform, there's another ML dialect that Microsoft's been pushing called Chart. People seem to be liking it a lot. It's more of an SML dialect, but still.
Yeah, I've been very leery about the whole .NET application because...
Whatever. I mean,
yeah,
the point is that those are looking at safer languages now. And
agreed.
That's a good thing. That is a very
well, the thing is, you know, languages in general, the bounds checking, the security, you know, obviously comes into the methodology of the product that you're putting together. You know, as long as it depends upon what you're putting out there and what your audience is based on, right?
No, I disagree.
Why?
Because the software that you put out that is theoretically bug-free, from investing hundreds of hours of man time to make sure that it's bug-free, is going to be the exact same machine code as a compiler that lets you express the same thing in a manner that will not let you physically enter the bug to begin with. So.
Yeah, I was doing compiling the E4. Lots of error messages. You really don't know what it really means. You go into search, and they have put up a very extensive listing of all the error messages. You read it, error 6735. You read that line, you don't know what it means. Well, you don't know why it's jumping out at you.
And this is another reason why C is scorned by many people, is because the error messages have historically been very poor. Yes. Because it lacks context.
Mm-hmm.
With something like a functional language or with Go, like every time I get a full stack done, and especially in the case of Haskell, for example, it often will tell me exactly what the problem is. Mm-hmm. You have a type mismatch between this and that, and it's almost always a type mismatch. And it seems to be located, the source of the error seems to be located on this line and not on that line. Like, has like this very detailed error trace,
Wow.
and it's usually quite accurate. Not always. There are times when it's not perfect.
But it gets you close.
But it's vastly improved over
Yeah.
your typical C.
It's the assembler error message, the assembler error message points back to the line.
Right.
By curve. And then, although you don't understand exact message, yes, you can look at it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, terminology and representation of the error is important.
Oh, and actually, this kind of brings me back to extreme programming too, because what they tell you with extreme programming is you fix one error at a time. So like if you get 64,000 errors, fix the one that's on the top, because that error is usually exactly that one error is usually what causes subsequent errors.
Yeah, no, because when you clean up a set of errors, you produce another set.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's one core is really good. It stops at the first error.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a good promotion for Forth right there.
Say anything. It just stops there. Okay, you figure.
Right. That's exactly right. Well, the thing,
I found in Forth that there are exactly two classes of errors that usually bring my program down in flames. One is a word is not defined, and two is there's a stack balance. If I fix stack balance and I define all the words, usually the program works exactly as advertised. Usually. And if it doesn't, then it's because I specified it.
well, that's when you're gonna get those random anomalies, anyways. But
Yeah, haven't tested it. It's broken, and I can't.
just like backups, right? If you haven't tested it, exactly. Mm-hmm. Verify.
Actually, Ford makes TDD wonderfully. It's beautiful.
We'll turn off the mic and take a 10-minute break.
All right, 10-minute break. We'll be right back.
So it cost me $70 or something to find out I don't like this product anymore.
Yeah, when products are fully web, I mean, especially when you're dealing with licenses, that it's doing a web check for the whole base every single time, that's really retarded. Because, obviously, people can sell or steal keys off of people's systems if they make them secure, and so the only way to, because the thing is, a lot of times when you enter it in, it'll register it to that given machine, then it'll return that data to them, which is then authenticated. And I've seen this a lot. Some recovery software actually does this, and they will not, if you put it on a different machine, then and you try to register it through the web, then they will basically say that license has already been used. You can't do that. Even though they'll say that original machine doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
They'll force you to buy a new license.
Or something. Well, that's okay. If you have to accept that sometimes you're not going to be able to port all the software you bought to the next machine that you buy. So this one's been answered for you. In 2011, scientists successfully extracted yeast, apparently, from amber.
I was going to say Jurassic Park.
Yeah, it is. It's Jurassic beer. So, a big chunk of which video games advertising budget was spent on educational videos? Anybody know? Anybody want to guess?
Assassin's Creed.
Bam. Wrong answer. Total War Rome 2. So apparently there were these educational videos, and they made them to show in classes. And so they said, okay, and this game, this educational history video was brought to you by Total War Rome 2. So go out and buy the game. Have a little bloodthirsty bloodshed. And
they seem to be all like killing games, right?
Yes.
Either that or strategy.
so I ran across this thing. You know how heroin dealers will give you a little taste. Well, Microsoft is no better or worse. They give you a little taste, and this is sort of kiddie crack to lead you to Visual Studio Express, which will eventually lead you to Visual Studio Pay Me. But it looks kind of interesting, and it's a language for kids, and there's a lot of educational and tutorial and teacher support stuff that goes along with it. I think it's probably outmoded by now. I think this was a few years ago that they did this, but I think it's still available. So it's a lesson for us, the sort of thing we might want to do to put forth, have
Microsoft's small fourth.
Microsoft's small fourth without the Microsoft.
How much smaller than you get? What do you want to run on?
As opposed to what? Win32 fourth?
Yes, as opposed to
Everything but the kitchen sink and the kitchen sink.
and it actually is a question. How small do you want to get in your microprocessor? How much RAM do you want to get it down to?
So, another piece of geek trivia. Who was the first recipient of the texting slang OMG?
I would say Winston Churchill.
Yeah, because it just seems like that's the right answer. It just goes to show you. I hear that a new order of knighthood is on the tapis. OMG. Shower it on the Admiralty. Ooh. That's a good question. It almost worked. I think that was the one that had the micro switch pointed the wrong way bug. But it did return the samples. Luna 16. Well, yeah. Stardust was, but Luna 16 was a different deal.
But isn't that also the one that they walked up to without having boots on, and they said, "Oh, there it is. Yes. That won't be dangerous. We swear."
We didn't read the Andromeda strain.
Never heard.
So in 1970, Luna 16 orbited the moon, studied lunar gravity, landed on the surface, gathered a sample, and brought it back to Earth, which is like totally way cool. Oh, this is a good question. I used to know this. Let's go with that, yeah. You know, is it New Zealand or Australia where there's a huge number of people answering their census as to what their religion is as Jedi. And unfortunately, it's a crime. So it's yet to be seen whether any of them will be persecuted.
The dark words against Jedi?
It's the Sith. Or ISIS or something, I don't know.
Serotan is nature spelled backwards.
Yeah, there you go.
Amazon A to Z.
Anybody? Kobo? Really? What do they supply? Anybody know?
Books like who? They supply ebooks.
Cuckoo, Daddy-o.
They're one of the biggest in Asia. In Japan, mostly.
Kobo is an anagram for book.
Clever.
There was a study that came out not too long ago that said that reading a Kindle or another e-reader is fundamentally different for your brain than reading a paper book. Like you can, I guess, take that with a grain of, yeah. It's only easy because you knew the answer. Obviously, Tatooine. Yeah. Let's go with that.
Oh, nibble.
Yeah, we all know that one.
It's what gets nibbled.
Yeah, but why? It's with a Y.
Yeah. Somebody write Geek Trivia and tell them they got it wrong.
What? I don't think so.
No, I think you did.
Star Trek Universe. Oh, sure, because they're still going along and along.
So it looks like they counted, Sam. So you're going to have to come up with better data than I don't think so.
It went on a lot longer
Oh, I know this. It looks like a smile. It's 1010. Oh, we know the answer to this one too. How many saw the billboard? Say again? There was, in 2004, a billboard, simple white billboard with black text, first 10-digit prime found in consecutive digits, .com. The answer to the problem is Euler's number, and it would lead the curious to the now defunct. And it was all part of Google trying to find really smart people to work for them.
Oh, that,
Found only in Detroit.
Motownium.
Motownium. I want to say Fordite.
Ruby salt. Fordite.
Ha ha. What the heck is Fordite?
Okay, first those are the old billboards. I know that one. I've seen it.
Lego. We can go down and look at it if you've got the key to the building. Isn't it down in the HP building?
Gates building. It wasn't the Gates building. I'm not sure where it is now.
So it's a colorful material, highly reminiscent of agate. Entirely matte and really cool relic of Detroit's automotive age. So it's lumps of paint, accumulated drips.
That's kind of cool, actually. Yeah, I like that. Art in itself.
It's a good form of recycling right there.
All right. So maybe this is like popcorn or Lay's potato chips. Just one more. I'll eat just one more. I want to say it's television. And who's the inventor? Who do they have down as the inventor? Philo Farnsworth. I remember when Fry's used to have a Farnsworth tube and an Audion and all that stuff in their Sunnyvale store. Philo Farnsworth.
The character was that was in Warehouse 13. The little television communicators that they used were called Farnsworths.
It was in what?
Warehouse 13.
Was it a what warehouse? What's Warehouse 13?
When they opened it up, it's kind of like a Indiana Jones thing, you know, the warehouse where they stored the Ark of the Covenant kind of deal.
Okay. I've been to that warehouse. It used to be in Milpitas, and they sold the land. I don't know where they moved the stuff to.
Many warehouses, it's Warehouse 13, right? It's, of course, there are other warehouses around the world that house all these unique things, whether they're sunglasses or some kind of object that has turned into either a weapon or a charm, something that does something to somebody else, and they take it out of they capture it out of the hands of the gerbil population, and then they hide it away in this procedure.
So is this a book or a movie or?
It was a TV show series.
Was it on cable?
Yes.
Okay.
Sci-fi channel.
There's the rub. I don't have cable, so I'm out of it. You know, while I had teenage children, I should have applied for a handicap sticker because I was so lame. Oh.
That deserves a handicap sticker, right?
Yeah, there you go. This actually happened. So what computing rule of thumb predicts the doubling of computer power every 2 years? Everybody knows this one. It's actually not doubling of computer power. It has to do with transistors and the number they're on. So this is FastAware, and apparently they made the red color with uranium oxide in the glaze. So in the 30s and 40s, they made it with plain old uranium out of the ground. And then later on, after the nuclear age, and they finally were able to get more uranium, nobody told them it was a bad idea to make more FiestaWare in the 60s with depleted uranium. So this is weaponized dinnerware. You know, if your wife were to throw this at you. All right.
It cooks while it's inside the dish.
It's like the
it's like a
attacker
self-microwave.
It's rounds or depleted uranium. I remember a guy that was in the Air Force. He maintained those for guns.
Yeah.
Oh, he said, oh, there's no problem. I mean, you know, rounds, unless you went down in the battlefield with the ground, then maybe.
Yeah, or breathe the dust.
And you kind of go, dude, yeah, uranium is, there are parts of uranium, there are isotopes that are radioactive, but uranium really is chemically toxic.
Yep.
I remember seeing home do-it-yourself science books and stuff like that, where it's like you could order Geiger counter kits and whatnot. And one of the things was pull out your dinnerwares and check them for, so like they knew that this was radioactive.
Oh my God.
Well, you know, there are certain standard kits, and stuff for not only weight, but for rigidity. They actually use in the structural. So when they crash, it's a hazardous waste site. They have to go into the
You've got to prove a gyrocopter, right?
Yeah, the Benson gyrocopter.
No, not that Catmobile.
A different one.
What they use for the weighting into the blade, they use the blade uranium. Because they like it, it's nice and dense. So they don't have to use a lot, but they shove it all the way out to the end of the blade.
As long as it's encapsulated.
Well, yeah.
Not many people know the force. Because when the plane hits the ground, it breaks the encapsulation.
Of course it is. Pretty much every movie I see, at the end of it, when the credits are rolling, I turn to the guy sitting next to me, and I said, "Are they about to find Thor's hammer in the desert?" So this is the Glomar Explorer, and under cover of great secrecy, they developed this device that reached down into the ocean and grabbed pieces of submarine. Well, it tried really hard to bring the whole thing up, and it just didn't work. But they got stuff, and the whole story is really interesting. I find it compelling. Back when I first started Lockheed, they had stuff over in the corner of the lot that was used to develop and test. And I actually knew people that worked on this, on parts of this project. It was quite a story. And with that, I remind you that a motion to adjourn is always in order. It's never debated. It's just voted. And I move we adjourn.
You're moving right now.
So that's it, everybody. We're going to sign off, and we'll see you next time.